Welcome, everybody. Thank you for hanging in during the course of the entire Sisyphus Challenge. We're now at our final week of this event, where we're going to discuss the process of reviewing the results and interpreting the findings. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to the team here. For all of the prior sessions, for both the anti-VEGF study as well as this fluoroquinolone study, all of the prior sessions we've had have been recorded and posted at odyssey.org/SOS challenge. I'll put the link in the chat and encourage you guys to take a look at that resource. I'm really appreciative of all of the folks who contributed their time to either or both of those studies, and I think that the resources that have been created over the course of the last 8 weeks are super helpful for not just for these two studies, but actually more pressingly for how to think about going through the journey of conducting a network study. And so I encourage you all to take a look at those materials and hopefully make use of them as you think about network studies that you're going to want to conduct yourself within our community. The other thing that I'll reinforce and highlight is that while we are finishing up this sequence of sessions, these 4 studies are not over, but this is really an opportunity to kick off the next phase of the journey for these studies, which is really going to be centered on how we actually make sure that all data partners who are interested in contributing have the opportunity to get the analysis package executed and share their results for us to do the final evidence synthesis that you learned about last week, and then ultimately for us to finalize results. For this study specifically, I think the team's going to share what our deadlines are, but I want those of you on the call, as well as those that are listening to the recording, to hear that we still encourage your active participation in sharing of results throughout until the deadline. And then we're going to have a drop dead so that we can actually finish up the results, and these results will feature prominently at the Odyssey APAC Symposium, as well as result in publications. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Thank you, Jody, for posting the link in the chat. And today, as we go through the results, I encourage those of you on the call to actively participate, ask questions. This is probably less of a tutorial and more of a journey of where we're at in a discussion. And since we're not at the point of being able to say that this is the final set of results, it's really a great opportunity for us to just discuss and understand where are we at this point, where we anticipate going, and what will be our next steps moving forward with the study. So with that, I will turn it over to the team to take us through our final week of the Sisyphus Challenge.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. My name's Jack. I'm going to be sharing the slides from my computer. Can't actually see anyone because I clicked some random button that hit everyone's faces. So feel free to jump in and interrupt me if you want to say something about a particular slide. But I'm just going to give a brief overview of sort of where we started from and where we are now. So first off, why did we conduct a network study in this case? Just a bit of a background about the fluoroquinolones and why we're sort of interested in them here. So we know that they are broad spectrum antibiotics, and their use is rising internationally because of the resistance to some of our, first line choices for different types of infections. They are indicated for many different types of infections, including urinary tract infections. We also started off looking at pneumonia as an indication as well, bone and tissue infections, as well as some of the other uses of these medications. So they are generally well-tolerated antibiotics. However, some post-marketing studies have identified an increased rare risk of aortic aneurysms or dissections. Now, the pharmacological mechanism or how these might happen is not very well understood. It is thought to maybe be related to the collagen hypothesis, where if you have a damage or destruction to the collagen, that could affect the aorta as well. What happened though was the regulators responded with some black box warnings for these products and also suggested limiting their prescribing to very certain circumstances. So down the bottom here, I've just got what the Therapeutic Goods Administration here in Australia had to say about the use of fluoroquinolone antibiotics and their risk of these outcomes. What we found when we sort of started looking at this association was that the quality of the evidence was actually moderate, and there were some quite significant inconsistencies in the study design. So thinking about the choice of what antibiotic we're comparing the fluoroquinolones to, follow-up, patient age as well, and stratifying by individual quinolones. There's not too many studies out there that have looked at, is there a specific risk with certain quinolone antibiotics. And some other things since the meta-analysis that this is sort of relating to is some of the other studies have been confounded by indication and also been subject to surveillance bias as well. So this led us to three main primary research questions. So what is the rate of aortic aneurysm or dissection after initiation of these antibiotics? And we specifically focused on their use in UTI. Does exposure to fluoroquinolones increase the risk of experiencing aortic aneurysm or dissection within 1 year after exposure start? And for a patient with UTI, what is the probability that they'll go on to have an aortic aneurysm or dissection following the initiation of the antibiotic? And so we fitted that into the framework of characterizing, estimating, and predicting the risk of these outcomes. In terms of our cohorts here, so we had people using fluoroquinolones for urinary tract infections, and we've started off by looking at all fluoroquinolones. We did, I guess, plan to look at individual fluoroquinolones and what their risk might be, but we haven't done that just yet. In terms of our active comparators, we chose trimethoprim with or without sulfamethoxazole and also cephalosporins. And our outcomes of interest were aortic aneurysms with or without rupture, aortic dissection, and then the composite outcome of aortic aneurysm or aortic dissection. And our negative controls were recommended by the common evidence model and then decided between us as a group. So the rationale for conducting a network study, we wanted to improve the understanding of the risk of these outcomes across the globe. And because they're really rare outcomes, we also needed a really large population for our study to be adequately powered. And we'll have a look at some of our power later on. In terms of potential benefits and impacts, we can further clarify the risk for the regulators and then guide their decisions about, how these medicines should be used in the future. And so just as a reminder, we started, almost 2 months ago, and we're already at the stage of interpreting the results. So I think that's pretty exciting to see how much progress we've made in such a short amount of time. So moving on to the results so far, we've got 9 data partners who have submitted their results. We've got approximately 12 million patients so far who have had a UTI, 4.3 million who have taken a fluoroquinolone for that UTI, and 858,000 people who have had an aortic aneurysm or dissection. And just as a reminder too, these results are available at the data.odyssey.org Shiny app. We have approximately another 11 data partners to contribute as well, so it'll be good to see those results trickling in soon. So I'll just step you through some of the things we're seeing so far, and Nicole and Shannon, whoever else, feel free to jump in as we go through. So the first graph I wanted to show you was some time to event graphs, which help understand their characterization here. So we're looking at our target cohort of fluoroquinolone users when the indication is for a urinary tract infection, and our outcome here is aortic aneurysm or dissection. Just to help keep things clear, I've got just the results for the Optum EHR and Optum Extended DoD data sets. The first graph here is showing you per 1 day, and the bottom one here is per 30 days. So it's quite interesting to see that quite a few people are having their aortic aneurysm or dissection before they start their quinolone antibiotic. On this next slide, we're comparing fluoroquinolones to some other antibiotics. So we've got trimethoprim as our comparator, and again, looking at the outcome of aortic aneurysm or dissection. I've listed all of the different data sources here, but focusing on the 90-day fixed window here. The first results here, I think didn't pass diagnostics there, but down here we've got the hazard ratios for the ones that did pass. And you can see there's quite a bit of variability in terms of the hazard ratios, uncalibrated and then calibrated over here as well. So I might get Nicole to help me out with this one here. We've got fluoroquinolone again compared to trimethoprim, looking at only the Optum EHR data and the outcome here of aortic aneurysm or dissection. We've got a hazard ratio of 0.94, our confidence interval there crossing 1, and same for our calibrated hazard ratio there as well. And our minimum detected relative risk there, it was 1.3. Did you have anything you wanted to add on to that, Nicole?
No, only to say that, you mentioned at the start that this is a very rare event and we need lots of data and lots of these minimally detectable relative risks are, quite high, and we haven't sort of reached that for many of the studies, which just goes to show the importance of this, cross-national studies where we really need to, boost the power and do our meta-analysis. So, yeah, I think it just really highlights the reason why we do this work.
Jack, you mentioned the prior literature. Can you remind me? So I know that, or actually, I think, I don't know. You can correct me if I misspeak. I don't remember that one of the prior papers that was either referenced in the meta-analysis that you had previously cited, nor some of the other papers that we identified. I don't think any of them explicitly did the comparative cohort design of fluoroquinolones versus the classes that we've looked at. But in terms of the magnitude of the population sizes, can you remind me, like you're showing this one is one database for this one comparison, and we've got whatever, 500,000. Can you remind me the sample sizes for the existing literature that the evidence is based off of?
I feel, definitely tested me on that one, but they're comparatively smaller than what we'll achieve with our meta-analysis, that's for sure. Yeah, they're quite small in comparison. I can't tell you the actual numbers off the top of my head, but it's a lot smaller than probably even what we're seeing just with this one database.
Yeah,
what wasn't intended to try to make it a pop quiz. I guess my question, and maybe we pull it up as we're having this discussion on the call, but it seemed to me that those other studies had methodologic concerns about their designs and the way that they'd come up with things, and that would potentially be risks of bias.
Yes.
But on top of that, to Nicole's point about small sample, to point about rare outcomes, is on top of that, if the studies were smaller, it meant that they were there was going to be more random error as well as the systematic error. And I think generally our experience has been is we really have to deal with systematic error, and random error kind of takes care of itself. But it seems in our case we're going to have both greater power as well as greater confidence that we've handled the systematic error.
For sure, yeah. I have also got a screenshot of the attrition over here, but I think Chan's going to talk about that a little bit later on. So I'll leave that one for him. The next slide here, we've got just looking at our propensity scores and the overlap between our cohorts for fluoroquinolones and trimethoprim. So we have good overlap there. But we'll look at the one for cephalosporin. We've sort of talked about this in other weeks, that it looks a little bit different. And similar with our covariate balance, we've got pretty good adjustment there as well. Nicole loves these graphs, so I'm going to let her talk to the systematic error ones.
Jack, come on, you can do it. So yeah, I think in general, what we've got here is on the bottom, we've got the uncalibrated hazard ratios. So what we're looking for there is, the dots in the plot within that, the red triangle area, suggesting, there's no, the hazard ratio and the confidence interval contains 1. And so these are all of our negative controls. So here we've got 50 estimates from the list of negative controls that were reviewed from the study team. And so we're expecting them to have no increased risk. And you can see there, in the uncalibrated, there's a little bit of bias. We've got 84% of the CIs include 1. In the calibrated estimates, we get more nominal characteristics, so around 92% of the CIs include 1. And we've seen this for pretty much all of the analyses that we've done so far, that there is kind of minimal inherent bias there. So our calibrated results have, ended up being quite similar in most cases. I haven't reviewed them all, but in the most cases, the ones I've looked at, there doesn't seem to be a heap of inherent bias in our study. So all of our ease statistics have all passed, pretty much all passed diagnostics. There haven't been that many that haven't. So yeah, I think in the end, we've got some really good characteristics going on here.
This next slide just shows you as I was sort of alluding to, the difference in the propensity scores for the fluoroquinolones and cephalosporins. So you can see that they're a little bit different there. So still looking at the Optum EHR data source. So equipoise probably isn't as good, but still okay. And similarly, again, after propensity score adjustment, everything is below 0.1. We've got another systematic error one. We've sort of talked about that enough with the trimethoprim one. But again, just showing you that we've got not much inherent bias there. So I think Chan's going to go through the next part with us. So the next step is to do the meta-analysis across the different sites. And what you can see here on the right is we've got quite a bit of heterogeneity between our hazard ratios and our findings there. So I'll hand over to Chan to talk through these.
Thank you, Jack, for the wonderful presentation you've had. Yeah, please go to the next slide. So I'd like to address the heterogeneity I found in this study. And first of all, I'd like to talk about the empirical equipoise determined by overlap in preference score. The preference score depicted in these graphs are as a kind of the propensity score accounting for the market share of the treatments, comparative treatments. And equipoise means a balance of opinion in the treating community about what really might be the best treatment for a given class of patients. So in this setting, what is there balanced opinions across the clinicians in each countries or each health system to treat patients with UTI in outpatient setting? And when we compare fluoroquinolone versus trimethoprim, we found that there is less equipoise in Korea and Japan. The NHIS and NSG database is the sample cohort of the National Health Insurance System of Korea, which represents the Korean routine clinical practice. And awesome, the database is the database from Aju University from Korea, and JMDC is the claim database from Japan. And you can see that there is somewhat less equipoise or overlap in the preference score, which means there is no sufficient equipoise in these two in this comparison. And go to the next, please. And when you see the database from the results from the United States, Veterans Affairs OptimEHR, Pharmetrics, and IBM MDCD, you can see the much larger overlap in preference score, which means better equipoise, and which means a balanced opinions to treat a UTI when you have the two choices, fluoroquinolone versus trimethoprim. This is really interesting for me. And when we see the comparison of fluoroquinolone versus cephalosporin, then you can see the much better equipoise in Korean and Japan. So much larger, more overlap in the preference score. And then go to the next. Okay, and in the United States, you can see that the last overlap in these four results from United States. Even though they do have the sufficient overlap, we usually define the equipoise as the majority of the majority of these are in the overlap in terms of the preference score, and I think that majority of them are in the overlap, so more than 50%. Since I'm not the physician in the United States and I do not treat the patients in the United States, so I do not know why actually this happens in the United States. But I know that unfortunately in Korea, we do not care, clinicians usually do not care about the cost effectiveness, since we are used to waste our medical practice or medical service or drugs, because since most of them are really cheap in our countries. So I think that trimethoprim is somehow has less coverage or less broad antibiotics or narrow antibiotics compared with the cephalosporin. So unfortunately, clinicians in Korea prefer cephalosporin over trimethoprim to treat UTI because they do not want to care about the cost and patients, and they did not want to prescribe the less broad antibiotics for patients. And please go to the next. So you can see that the difference in terms of the equipoise when you compare fluoroquinolone versus trimethoprim and fluoroquinolone versus cephalosporin. And please go to the next. In the United States, I don't know why, but there is much more of overlap, and when we set the computer as trimethoprim rather than cephalosporin, even though we do have sufficient overlap in the cephalosporin's results.
And Chan, I'll just comment there, because when we have the propensity score distributions, we can also actually go look at the propensity score model and look at the coefficients to try to understand that. And the one thing that we see that's consistent in the United States is actually two patterns that seem to be consistent. One is it seems like that there is some preferential treatment towards pregnant women towards cephalosporin, so that's a small chunk of it. But actually, the bigger chunk is actually just the features that represent the index year, because in the United States, there's been specific efforts over the last decade to try to reduce the use of fluoroquinolones, and that's of course corresponded to increased use in other antibiotics. And so part of what you're seeing here is that the earlier years are strong predictors of fluoroquinolone use, and the later years are strong predictors of cephalosporin use. And so that policy shift is kind of, actually, I find it reassuring to see that like consistent across the US data sets, because that's something that there has been some, health policy efforts towards. But it also is reflective of like the databases that we have that longer time for.
Thank you, Patrick. And I note the comments from Mark and Evan in the chat. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the trimethoprim exposure in the US or North America would almost always be through Septra or Bactrim. So you'd have the SMS. So they're really actually different drugs. And that might account for, like, the coverage with that SMS component might be closer to fluoroquinolones. I have to actually look up like what kind of holes you inherit if you just go with the trimethoprim component, because I've never actually used it. But it might be partly that TMP SMX is more similar to fluoroquinolones in terms of the coverage that you get versus trimethoprim alone. So that might account for, at least on the TMP side, the differences in the preference scores between those regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I believe that the trimethoprim in this comparison is that trimethoprim with or without the sulfamethyl pleasure. So I think we include the Bactrim, the combined drugs with the sulfamethyl pleasure in this comparison.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that in the US databases, almost all of that, I'm sure 95, 99% of that trimethoprim exposure is coming in the form of TMP SMX. Whereas in the other markets, it's not, and so it might be part of what's leading to that change in preference scores.
But in Korea, that's true in Korea too. So we do not have a single trimethoprim drug.
Oh, okay, my bad. Fascinating. I think this is a story on its own. It's quite interesting.
So that represents the routine clinical practice in different countries or different health systems. Which we do not know from the clinical guidelines. So please go to the next slide. So when you see the attrition chart, that we have only 600 comparator who use trimethoprim to treat UTI, when we have the 10,000 patients using fluoroquinolone to treat UTI. So there is really large difference in Korean database, which represents the national clinical practice. And in the cephalosporin comparison, you can see that lots of enough patients in the comparator group. So we do have more than 7,000 patients compared with the 10 times more patients when you compare with the trimethoprim. So there is really, huge preference on cephalosporin or fluoroquinolone over trimethoprim in Korea. Yeah, please go to next. Yeah, when we see the Veterans Affairs data, when we have the target patients of 200,000 and 200,000, we found that 100,000 patients using trimethoprim, and we do have only also 100 patients who use cephalosporin to treat UTI. So there is no significant preference between trimethoprim and cephalosporin in terms of the just number of patients who use in the course. There is another pretty interesting finding. And when you see the baseline characteristics, we see that majority of patients in Korea actually are in their 40s or 50s, whereas majority of the patients in the VA were in their 60s or 70s. It represents again the baseline characteristics of the population in the country or the health system, because Veterans Affairs usually veterans, it's the hospital for veterans. And you can see that usually the UTI is much more prevalent in female rather than in men. So about 70% of the patients were female, were women in Korea, but it was only 10%. So there's really huge difference between Korea and Veterans Affairs. And finally, all patients in the national in Korean data were Korean. So and there are some black and white and Asian and unknown or other races in Veterans Affairs. So yeah, there are really very few pregnant women in their 60s and 70s. So I want to address that why we need this network study to answer the single questions. So when you plot the distribution of possible results for one single question, there might be a single study to answer to the single question. And please go to the next. So in the results from the published the results published in the JACC journal found that there is positive association between quinolone use and the aortic dissection or aortic aneurysm. And the other studies published in JAMA Internal Medicine found that there is no relationship between the quinolone versus quinolone and the aortic aneurysm or dissection. And there might be another study which can show the negative association between the drug use and the aortic aneurysm or dissection. And then next slide. So there might be a large heterogeneity across the method and the databases in terms of the possible results for one single questions. And when we conduct the network study, we can see the conclusion, how these many results can be drawn, can be used to draw one single conclusion, and that's why we need Odyssey and the network study, I believe. Yeah, that's the all my presentations. And Jack, could you continue?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair. So we haven't presented any of the results yet for the self-controlled case series either. So that's because everything fails. And that's mainly due to unstable time trends towards the end of the study period. There is some results there for the risk prediction model, but we're yet to explore them as well. So that's what we can be doing over the next few weeks. There is still time to submit results. So as Patrick said, we'll be letting you know that the cutoff date for data partners to submit their results is the 12th of June. So still got a few weeks to do that. And as Patrick said, the reason for that is that we're showcasing the study at the July APAC Symposium, which is in Sydney, Australia. So looking forward to meeting everyone in person there. Nicole and I went to UNSW just last week. Great venue, great accommodation, and I even got to see the Sydney Harbour Bridge for the first time. So pretty unbelievable that I haven't been to Sydney yet, but that was my first time, and it'll be great to see you there too. In terms of experiences of the process, Chan thought it would be a great idea for us all to share some of our experiences. Just start off with a few challenges that we faced. It was a fast-paced study, so we had to all keep on top of everything. I guess one of the other challenges that we faced initially was defining the indication phenotype for fluoroquinolone, so deciding which indication we were going to focus on. And I guess at the start we found it a bit challenging to really, define what type of pneumonia we're going to look at, whether we're going to look at it in an inpatient or outpatient setting. So that's why we ended up going with UTI, since it was a bit more easier, I guess, to characterize. In terms of lessons learned and improvements made, we now have the tools, as Patrick said, to conduct our own network studies or future ones as part of the Odyssey network. And it was also really great to see and hear the expertise of everyone over the last few weeks in the tutorials. So I might hand over to some of the other chief investigators and any other collaborators if you just want to share a few experiences over the last few weeks. Yeah, why don't we start with you, Chan?
Yeah, so and I need to answer to the questions from Scott. So he said,
he
asked, when it comes to interpreting results, if you go through all these steps to show how these systems are so different, how do you go to present them, compare them, and the same study? So first of all, we release all the data to the public. So that's what we do, and then we need to admit that heterogeneity occurs to databases, and that's true, and that's all we have. And usually we but still in a single study we agreed them all in the meta-analysis accounting for heterogeneity too. So I'm not sure that it's enough answer to this question.
Yeah, Jen, if you don't mind, I'll chime in because I'll probably be even a little bit stronger about it because I think Scott's comment's a really important one. There is a difference between having a heterogeneous collection of data sources and having heterogeneity in the effect estimate. And actually, I would assert that given that we have a collection of databases that are producing estimates that are consistent with one another, it's actually a remarkable strength that we have different databases in different geographies, with different data capture processes that are producing effect estimates that are actually consistent with one another. Because while someone could look at the VA as an example and say, oh, well, that's a bunch of older, predominantly males in one EHR system with one formulary process. So I'm not sure if that it generalizes to some other population. The fact that we're seeing, private payer claims and public payer claims and claims in EHRs and data in the US and Korea and Japan, if at the end of this, the estimates across those different databases are consistent with one another, then that actually dramatically, in my opinion, strengthens my confidence that the effect is not subject to the peculiarities of a data population or a data capture process. If we see heterogeneity in the effect estimates, then that raises the question, is that true population heterogeneity, meaning we trust the effect estimate, but maybe the effect is different in different populations, or is it something else? The good news about our study diagnostics is we have some level of belief that the studies that pass diagnostics are internally valid, so that they should represent valid effect estimates within their populations. And then as we look at the meta-analysis results across the databases, that's when we're going to be able to try to ascertain that understanding of population heterogeneity. But I agree with the assertion that it can be more complex to describe the diverse data sources we have. But my personal bias is that I think a tremendous strength we have over the existing literature in this space is the idea that we're looking at lots of different databases to try to disentangle this effect, rather than just taking a single estimate from a single database.
And that is the power of the Odyssey community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, we are recruiting the data partners to join the study. And personally, I'm struggling to submit the results from my institution and try to build the Docker environment to execute the study. And if you have similar problems or challenges, please let me know, since I'm almost figured it out. So yeah, I think I can share my results until the deadline of the study.
Jan, if you sort this out on Docker, let's talk.
Thanks. Yep. So we can go to the next, I think.
Yeah, so I guess the next slide is just talking about what we want to do from here. So we've suggested that the meetings still continue to be weekly meetings, and sort of turn into some work group meetings and maybe some turbocharged writing sessions to help get this paper written. We still need to conduct the meta-analysis and interpret the patient-level prediction results. So that's what we can work towards as well. And just wanted to open up a discussion too about whether we should investigate individual quinolones as well, since that was something we talked about at the start. So open to hearing what other people think we should be doing with that.
So one step to asking that question would be to get a report of what are the individual quinolones used in different data sources.
Yes.
So that we have counts, and we have that information through the characterization, right? If you look through the index, break down the index event, it will break it down by ingredient, and you can do a simple aggregation. And then we should balance that with our minimal detectable risk ratio estimates that we currently have across the larger data sources to first gas. Do we think will be powered, and for which comparisons might we be sufficiently powered?
Cool. I can action that for this week, this next week. That'll be great. Thank you. Yeah, and then the roles and responsibilities down the bottom here, we've got interpret results and write manuscript. Reach out, as Chan was saying, to the Odyssey staff. So I think everyone was saying reach out to Senna if you're having any troubles there, and he can help you submit your results as well. And for everyone else, helping to contribute to the manuscript, which is on the Teams channel there. And I guess, yeah, any future plans for additional studies as well. This is the last slide, so feel free to jump in and add anything else.
I apologize, Jack, because I have not kept up with it, and I suspect that you guys are ahead of me. So I apologize for the naive comment. But given the initial results we have seem to be at odds with the literature, we're of course looking for more results so that we can kind of have a final answer, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but to play out the thought experiment, given that we already have now multiple databases providing a consistent story that seems to be inconsistent with the literature. I'm curious, for those of you that are leading this study, what has been your interpretation of the literature, both that initial meta-analysis that you cite in the protocol, but also there has been numerous papers that came out after that meta-analysis was done. I know like there was that one paper in I think it was JAMA Surgery that specifically used the market scan data, and they claimed to show an increased risk, though their study had a much smaller effect than all the meta-analysis things. So just curious where you guys are in terms of synthesizing the existing literature and situating, and how you anticipate situating our findings in the context of those previous papers.
Yeah, let me first. So I think this study is one of the perfect examples for the observational study. So I just said there are numerous results, and the results are inconsistent. Some of them are show the positive association, and the others show the negative neutral associations between the drug use and the aortic disease. And sometimes there are so many misuse of observational studies in the papers, such as they do not define the setting of the antibiotics, such as they do not define the infections for the drugs. So when you define the infection, such as UTI or pneumonia, the results are towards to a neutral association. And so we showed that by using the numerous databases with different characteristics, that we can see that the results can vary across databases and across methods, and we should be really cautious to interpret the results from the observation study, and we can show that the best practice of observation study from our results.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Chan. I think what Patrick, you might be suggesting is we should go back and have a look at the studies that have been published in similar data sets to the ones we've actually implemented our study, and determine how they did their study design and how we get these disparate results if we do. So I think as a group we really need to go back and look at the literature and see how they've designed their study and the population, look for similar data sets that we've used, and see the difference in results. So it's I haven't done that task, and I think as a group we need to kind of really focus on that task, because that's where the differences will be highlighted, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to lead the witness, though. I agree with what you're suggesting there, Nicole. I'm thinking, given that there is a collection of studies and others have used the evidence from those studies, then even if we believe that our study is reliable, we're going to have to put double effort towards just reconciling the differences. And and in like just as an order of magnitude thing here, you got like a chunk of studies that all said a relative risk between like 2 and 3 that were meta-analyzed. You had a couple subsequent papers. One said there was no effect, and then one said that the effect's like 1.3. But then here we come in with something that's saying like across the board, basically near null. Those are pretty different conclusions. In fact, if it was our study, I think that the qualitative conclusion would be we don't observe evidence to suggest there's an increased risk, and if there is a risk, the upper bound is no greater than 20% or something like that. Like somewhere in that vein is where we would be drawing our conclusion. Whereas the actionable conclusion from all the other studies is there is a risk. One should warn patients and one should discourage the use of this product because of this risk. And so those are directionally very different conclusions. And as it relates to our paper, like I'm going to just for the purpose of the discussion, like let's assume we're right and everybody else is wrong. This could have a profound impact on the world's use of antibiotics, but we shouldn't just assume people are going to do like, oh, that's a good group of researchers. Let's just discard everything we've written into health policy and product labeling and everything else and just go with this because this one study came out. We're going to have an uphill climb here.
Hello. The previous paper published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2020, which used the IBM MarketScan database. That study also include indication cohort, so they divide the people in pneumonia and UTI, and they also compare fluoroquinolone and trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole in UTI cohort. And they also identified that there is no extra risk in fluoroquinolone use in outcome of aortic aneurysm and dissection. So our result is quite similar, and our study setting is quite similar in those studies. And our study have strengths. The population is huge than that study. So I think it's worthwhile to report.
I think it's a good point. So if the one thing for the one study that showed no effect of the literature, if the thing that really demarcated that was the specific subgrouping into the UTI indication, then that is potentially a very important consideration that we need to tease out. I don't remember all the papers off the top of my head, but I remember the JAMA surgery paper, which was the more recent one, like 2022. That was MarketScan. And I remember it was a comparative design, but it was like a comparison like all other antibiotics without regard to indication, if I recall correctly. And that was the one that showed an effect, but it was like very small. And then there was other methodologic issues with like not adjusting for confounding very well. But like, so I think I would imagine, for example, maybe Nicole, this is where you were suggesting, like, we're probably going to need like a very specific like table that's like a row for every one of the other papers and an explicit statement of why is our study different and why would that potentially explain the difference. I think that's going to be important for someone to buy our results if they're going to be amenable to considering an alternative narrative to what's out there right now.
Exactly. I think we also have to be careful in the way that we, discuss these results as well. It's, this is one risk of a medicine, a fluoroquinolone that really should be, down the line, not for, so it's not, we have potentially no risk of aortic dissection, so that this medicine is fine. That's obviously not the not the way we want to pitch these results. So it's really important to kind of, this is just one risk in amongst a whole heap of other potential issues.
Yep.
I'll throw out a question as to where we draw the line between the things we're trying to avoid, which is kind of iterating on study design, which, you know, could have noble intentions of exploring the result space and, you know, thinking of that surface that was shown in that plot, right? We still have, you know, one, in some ways, not explored that full surface by, for instance, constricting ourselves to just a UTI cohort, which UTI, you know, probably of the number of indications might be a fairly short exposure, especially if we're looking at outpatient UTIs. And, you know, you might expect a dose response that, you know, maybe it's on the lower, maybe the dose is on the lower side compared to other things you'd use fluoroquinolones for example. And I know it's come up before where we talked about pregnancy being something that, you know, a priori we might have wished to have excluded, just to get, you know, better. I mean, I guess, you know, in many ways we trust our propensity scores to have kind of done that for us, but you could make a case for things like that as well. Does that enter into the discussion in terms of, you know, rerunning a study like this? Because of what you've mentioned, Patrick, and others, in terms of, like, you know, we're about to put a message out about the safety of a particular, you know, class of agents. We don't want to be p-hacking and searching for other things that would cause a significant result to all of a sudden appear, but we also want to be responsible in terms of the message that we put out about this class of antibiotics. And we do know there's some things that, you know, might have prevented us from exploring that surface of the meta-analytic result in the ways that we could otherwise.
I'll just unpack a little bit of what you said there, Evan, briefly, just to I think clarify in my own mind if I'm hearing you correctly. So one topic would be the question of, do we trust the results for the question we actually studied?
Right.
And so, for example, I'm personally not worried about the risk that pregnancy confounded our study, because I am quite confident that we have strong data that says, like, one, propensity score, or the pregnancy didn't drive the propensity score to be totally imbalanced. Two, we balanced on it. So I don't believe pregnancy is causing a confounder, as an example of that. The second thing, though, you said was, are there other questions? There's not different variant of analysis, but there are other questions. So the question we ended up narrowing in on was the effect of fluoroquinolones in UTIs. Our conclusion we can make is only about the effect of fluoroquinolones in UTIs.
Right. Maybe
fluoroquinolones have an effect when used for other indications. We can't make a comment about that one way or the other. I don't think that is a matter of p-hacking. That's a matter of asking a different question for a different population of interest. And it, from my perspective, if the team decided, like, we want to do that, that's not about, like, reanalysis. That's actually a new analysis of a new question, and that's totally fair game to consider exploring. I would say, like, the results right now, though, are, I think it's still a fairly broad group, but it is narrow to UTI because that's the choice we made. Whereas the other studies that are showing effects, most of them did not restrict to indication. I personally believe that that's a major source of bias, that they didn't actually do that restriction. But nonetheless, they're trying to make broad claims about the entire class by virtue of not having done that restriction.
Right. Fair enough. No, I think that's a fair assessment there. Thanks.
And I would add the why trimethoprim and sulfamethoxazole is less prescribed in Korea, and antibiotics is to treat microorganisms, so the resistance of microorganisms is quite different from country to country, so it affects the physician's preference to antibiotics to treat UTI. So why is one of the reasons the trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole is quite popular in US but not in Korea.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Very good. So Jack, can you just end this with a reminder again? What's our drop dead date for all those data partners who are still running?
You're on mute, Jack.
You're on mute.
I was just going back to my presentation to remind myself of the date. Give me 1 second. 12th of June. We've got
12th of June.
Yeah, so another 2 and a bit weeks.
All right. So Jing, I know you've got to some work to go back to your team to do some friendly nudging, and please let us know how we can help you with execution. I think you're running into technical issues that the community's here to help work through with you. So you and your team don't need to be figuring that out on your own. We want to help you through that.
Yeah, and
Hey, Patrick, just oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to complain saying, how in the world do you have your drop dead date the same week that your Odyssey submissions are due? Was that intentionally malaligned?
We got a lot of activities going on between now and into the end of July, between these studies finishing, our Odyssey Europe Symposium, our Odyssey APAC Symposium, and the Odyssey Global Symposium deadline. So lots of community fun here over the next several weeks.
Jack, you're doing a tremendous job. It's a lot of work between that drop dead date and when we all get together at the APAC meeting, when we're going to really enjoy reading through that first draft of a manuscript.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for the encouragement.
I was just have one quick question, because I think last Friday we did have the office hour in the morning. I mean, like this time on Friday for APAC. Is that still like, do we have that this week too? Because I think we're running some. Okay, then I guess I'll just be separate call if needed, because we're running some of the errors as Patrick mentioned earlier. Okay.
So
yeah, if you are running into issues, Jing, we can just coordinate time to help you. I know I think Senna's been doing some things asynchronously, but if we want to just schedule a time that's convenient, we can totally do that.
Sounds good. Yeah, we sent out the error yesterday. But just want to check if there is the office hour this Friday, then we'll come to the office hour. But yeah, we can set something up separately.
Yeah, and they just Jody can help with coordinating, make sure that everybody's got the right connections for what you need to get done.
Cool, thank you.
Jing, I sent you a note, so we can take that offline.
Awesome, thank you.
And can I just jump in here? And Jack mentioned we were suggesting that we continue this time weekly meeting going forward. Are people comfortable doing that? We'll just leave these meetings in the diary at the same time and come along, and each week we'll pick something and work on it together, and yeah, everyone's happy. Good. Yeah, so it'll be really great before those meetings. We have an outline of the paper. We obviously have the protocol. We now have all of the results. So do some homework before next time and come along with some questions or some observations. Obviously what Chan's done was just phenomenal today, putting sort of, propensity score distribution side by side, and we can really start to unpack the results. So go and play with the data and come back with some observations that will help us, work out what we're going to write in this protocol, in this paper, because I think it's going to be complex. So we need to kind of focus on some interesting results. So yeah, participate, come along and join in. It'll be fun.
Jody, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just put a standing meeting so that the whole community gets it, for those that want to be, just put it at this time, and it could just be a running meeting for at least until until the Odyssey APAC meeting. Well, at least
July. Yeah,
go to then. And
so what I'm going to do, Patrick, is just extend this this time, because I think I had it like scheduled not to drop off today, but a couple weeks from now. So I'll just extend that further.
Right.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes, reach out to Chung Soo. He will solve all your problems. That is a very good suggestion. I like that. Thank you, Jack, Chan, Jung-Ho, Nicole for going through that. I'm really excited by the progress you guys have made in the study. Really appreciative of everybody in the community who's contributed to this, and really look forward to seeing a final result and seeing it highlighted at the Odyssey APAC meeting in just 2 months. Thank you all for participating in this ISFIS challenge and getting us this far. I appreciate all your time and attention, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation starting next week at the same time.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye bye.